I brought out my entire spice collection today because I am making an Indian-Italian crossover recipe. I love both cuisines so much, and I find that they have a lot more in common than you might think. And I'd love to show you how with my favorite potato dumpling. I'm Zach, and this is Everything is Gnocchi. This recipe is a take on samosas, the Indian fried spiced potato filled dumpling. I'm going to be taking all the elements of samosas served with chana masala and reconstructing them as gnocchi. I've gotten started with my potatoes. I'm cooking and ricing them just like normal because both gnocchi dough and samosa filling begins with cooked mashable potatoes. And then to my riced potatoes, I'm going to add a bunch of spices. In some oil in a hot pan, I'm toasting cumin seeds, fennel seeds, and crushed coriander seeds. Then I'm going to add some ginger garlic paste, a chopped chili of your choosing, and some hing. And then I'll take this entire mixture and add it to my potatoes. I've also got some dried spices. I'm using turmeric, cumin powder, garam masala, amchur, which is a dried mango powder, red chili powder, and some salt. And I'm gonna take these and just mix it into my flour. Now, samosa filling normally wouldn't have flour, but to make it into gnocchi, our universal gnocchi theory says that all gnocchi are 2.5 parts gluten, like our cooked potato, to 1 part flour. So I've got 500 grams of cooked potatoes in my filling mixture, so that means I'll weigh out 200 grams of all-purpose flour and add my dried spices to that. Then to make our gnocchi dough, we'll just add our flour on top of our potatoes and begin to sift this together in between my fingers to get our dough to come together. We've made classic potato gnocchi before. We know that we're not going to need this. We're just going to sift it, lift it, and mix it so that everything can touch and our dough will begin to form a ball. This feels just like potato gnocchi dough, well, because it is potato gnocchi dough, just with some added spices and seeds, and that's making it so much more aromatic and flavorful and this really lovely golden color. We'll let this dough rest for 30 minutes. That's why I wanted to make this recipe, because samosa filling is already so close to being gnocchi, and I wanted to get it all the way there. As far as I know, there's not a version of gnocchi that exists in Indian cuisine by another name. This is probably a remix on our spectrum, or somewhere between a spin and a remix, but it feels really close to me, like samosas are just gnocchi that are wearing jackets. And on that note, we're going to make the jackets as well, the samosa dough that would be the wrapper of this dumpling. So this dough is going to be all-purpose flour plus ajwain seeds, which are really minty and earthy, kind of like a fennel or a caraway seed, and a big pinch of salt and some oil. We'll bring that together, and then to that, knead it with water until we get a homogeneous dough, but it doesn't have to be smooth. We'll let it rest for about half an hour, 40 minutes, and then roll it out. Because I'm first and foremost an Italian cook, I'm going to be rolling out the samosa dough on my pasta machine till about the 3rd setting here on my Atlas Mercato. Also, as an Italian nod, I'm going to cut these into fettuccine, and I'm also going to roll some of them into taralli, which is a pugliese, a southern Italian snacking cracker. So funny thing here is that this samosa dough is actually pretty much the same recipe as taralli dough. That is, the flour, water, oil ratio is nearly the same. There is some white wine typically used though in taralli. The first time I ate this samosa dough plain, just as crackers, it was eerily familiar and I couldn't quite place it. And then I realized it had the same texture as taralli and actually the same flavor, because taralli come in different flavors, and one of the popular ones is fennel seeds, which taste just like the ajwain seeds in this dough. Rather than frying, I'm going to bake these like crackers. So I'm going to lay them out on a baking sheet, brush them with oil, and then bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 40 minutes. they'll bake into whatever shape you make them on the tray. So I'm gonna leave some as these noodles, the fettuccine. I like to make some as these nests that resemble nests of dried pasta. And then of course, I'm also making these tirali, these tiny bagel-shaped crackers that you just roll around your finger. It's time to roll out these samosa gnocchi, and it works the same way as our regular potato gnocchi. The only difference is that the seeds and spices tend to break up the dough a little bit. So if you're not able to get as clean of a rope as normal, it's okay, just cut little dumplings and then you can reshape them in your hand. I was actually first introduced to Indian cooking by translating some of the Italian recipes that I was already familiar with. And that idea was actually introduced to me by the young South Asian American women that lived down the hall from me in college. And Ipshita, one of the roommates who is a close friend of mine from our classes, we would trade recipes on occasion, share food back and forth, especially if I was making something vegetarian. And one time I remember making a lentil ragu, which was me playing around with a vegan version of a bolognese ragu technique. And I brought it over and she was like, "Wait, this is Italian? We make this." And I said, "Yeah, it's inspired by Italian food and Italians cook with lentils as well, so sure." And so for my birthday that year, they gifted me a little box of spices and each spice had a Post-it note on it that said what the name of the spice was and what to put it in order to make that recipe Indian. So one of the spices, for example, was sambar powder, and they said next time you're making your lentil ragu, add some sambar powder, and now it's sambar masala. So today I'm making chana masala, a chickpea and spiced tomato dish that's going to work really well as a pasta sauce for our samosa gnocchi. I started by pressure cooking my chickpeas with smoky black cardamom, peppercorns, bay leaves, cinnamon sticks, salt, and tea bags. The tea bags are just going to dye the chickpeas a darker brown without adding flavor. I learned that trick from Cook with Manali, and I'm using her recipes as the base recipes for what I'm cooking today. She has her own blog and YouTube channel as well, and you should definitely check it out if you're looking for an online guide for great Indian cooking. I'm sauteing onions with cloves, then adding ginger garlic paste, then adding a can of pureed tomatoes, which may be more than is typically called for here, but I want this to be extra tomatoey because I'm going for that Italian style tomato sauce. I'll simmer, then add some spices and my cooked chickpeas. Look how brown they are. They're really dark and they're really flavorful too. And then I'll simmer for about half an hour while my gnocchi cooks before it's ready to be added into the sauce. I love to make my Italian recipes Indian, so to speak, and I often find that there's a similar dish that already exists in Indian cuisine and just goes by a different name. Both culinary traditions, of course, come from a place of making more out of less, of taking common, inexpensive ingredients like beans, rice, lentils, spices, and turning them into flavorful, nourishing meals that can feed a family. In Italian cuisine, this is called cucina povera, which is the poor cuisine or the poor kitchen, which is actually where a lot of today's most loved Italian recipes are from. These recipes are all pretty versatile because they had to be. We made these recipes with what grew nearby and what was available, which meant that every household has their own version. We weren't all, cooking from the same New York Times cooking recipe and getting upset if we didn't have every ingredient that was on the list. No, we were cooking with what we had, and it was always a little bit different and always delicious. I love that about gnocchi because they're one of those traditions that exists because it used to be an ordinary, everyday way of doing things that was making the most out of whatever we had, and over time came to be regarded as special. So much so that we love eating them out in restaurants. Now, I didn't grow up eating Indian food, so I feel the same way. It all feels special to me. And like Italian food, it often comes from that same place of making the most out of necessity. It can be intimidating to learn a new culture's food, and I just started. I'm nowhere near an expert on Indian food, and I'll probably never be fluent. I'll always need a spice guide and some recipes to get me through. But if you're curious, that's why I recommend you start with some recipes or some food that you are familiar with and use that as an entry point to add some new flavors from a different culture. And if you keep a more European pantry like I do, then you might not be familiar with a lot of these spices or maybe not even have access to them where you are. And that's okay. You can omit some and you'll still get more or less the same thing. But I did love taking this opportunity to go to the Indian grocery store and stock up on spices so that I can explore some new flavors that I wouldn't normally cook with. I know and love gnocchi, so I start there. But most traditional foods are pretty versatile because they had to be, so they lend themselves really well to being modified. That's how they survived over the years, after all, by being flexible and able to change while still holding on to their character. I'm so used to eating just like 3 dessert gnocchi on this show that I'm so excited to have a whole meal in front of me today. This is chana-masala with my Samosa Filling gnocchi and terali and breadsticks made from Samosa dough, topped with fresh cilantro and mint chutney. It's so flavorful. It has so many spices that feel very Indian to me, and as I'm eating this dish, it also feels like a bowl of pasta. And there's some great freshness from the toppings as well. You'll notice that I have not used the word authentic today, because that's just not the point. This dish is intentionally a remix, and all traditions were a remix at some point too. What matters is that I've made a dish that is delicious and meaningful to me. And I love any time I get to take something as simple as pasta and make connections across cultures and communities and generations. Thank you for being here. Please let me know if you make this, what you think. Let me know what I should make into gnocchi next, and I will look forward to seeing you on an upcoming Gnocchi Thursday.